In the first week of October 1918, in a forest in France, more than 500 American soldiers walked down into a ravine. The enemy closed in behind them and cut them off from the world. And for 5 days, the newspapers back home called them by a name that was not quite true, the Lost Battalion. Their commander was Major Charles Whittlesey, a tall, thin, bookish New York lawyer in wire-rimmed glasses who had never wanted to be a soldier at all. The men called him, behind his back, Galloping Charlie, because there was nothing fast about him. The soldiers he led were the 77th Division. Clerks and dock workers, immigrants and street kids from the tenements of New York, men who between them spoke a dozen languages and had been in uniform barely a year. In early October, they were thrown into the Great Meuse-Argonne offensive, the largest battle the American army had ever fought. The order was simple and absolute. Push through the Argonne Forest. Do not stop. Do not wait for the units on your flanks. Whittlesey obeyed. He drove his men forward through the tangled woods and into a steep ravine. But the French on one side and the Americans on the other were held up and fell behind, and the Germans quietly closed the gap behind him. By nightfall, Whittlesey and roughly 550 men were cut off in a hollow on the side of a hill, with German machine guns and mortars dug in on the high ground all around them. They had marched straight into a trap, and the door had shut. The Germans attacked at once and kept attacking. From above came machine gun fire, grenades rolled down the slope, and mortar rounds walked across the position. The Americans dug shallow holes with their hands and their helmets and held on. They had almost no food. They had gone in with a single day's rations, and now there was nothing. The only water was a stream at the bottom of the ravine, and the Germans had every machine gun trained on it. Men were shot reaching for a canteen of water. The wounded lay in the open. There was no morphine left, almost no bandages. Cold rain fell at night. The men gave up their own field dressings, their own coats, and listened to the crying of the hurt, and could do nothing. The German attacks grew worse. Probing assaults, showers of grenades, even flamethrowers sent down through the trees. Each time the thinning line of Americans somehow held, and each time more of them did not get up again. And then a new horror began. The American artillery, miles back, did not know exactly where the Lost Battalion was. Trying to protect them, the gunners dropped a barrage, and it fell directly on Whittlesey's own men. Their own shells, tearing through the pocket. Whittlesey had one way left to reach the outside world. Carrier pigeons. He scrawled a message and clipped it to the leg of the last bird, a pigeon named Cher Ami. We are along the road parallel to 276.4. Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it! The pigeon flew up and was hit at once, shot down out of the air. And then, impossibly, it rose again and flew on, bleeding, blinded in one eye, one leg hanging by a tendon. It reached the divisional loft 25 miles back. The barrage stopped. The little bird had saved what was left of them. But they were still trapped. Runners sent out to find help were killed or captured within yards. A relief patrol was wiped out. The pocket grew smaller, ringed by its own dead, and the living grew fewer. On the 5th day, the Germans tried something else. They sent back a captured American soldier, blindfolded, carrying a typed note in good English. It praised the Americans' bravery, and it asked them, for the sake of their wounded, to surrender. The legend says Whittlesey answered with 3 words: "Go to hell." Whether or not he ever said them, he did something just as defiant. The men had been laying out white cloth panels to signal aircraft. Whittlesey ordered them taken in, so the Germans would have no surrender to photograph? The answer was no. And then, to make sure the Germans understood, the starving, freezing remnant of the Lost Battalion gathered what little ammunition they had left and poured every round they could into the slopes around them. Not surrender, defiance. Night fell on the 5th day. They had been cut off for the better part of a week. Many were too weak to stand. The ammunition was nearly gone. By any reasonable measure, they should not have lasted another morning. But they were still there. And outside the pocket, the rest of the division had heard the story, the surrounded men, the pigeon, the refusal, and was fighting toward them with everything it had. On the evening of the 7th of October, the relief finally broke through the German ring. The first soldiers who climbed down into the ravine found a scene they never forgot: the dead unburied, the wounded everywhere, and a thin line of filthy, hollow-eyed men who had simply refused to break. Whittlesey had led roughly 550 men into the pocket. When it was over, only about 194 walked out under their own power. The rest were killed, wounded, missing, or captured. He walked out at the head of the survivors, and he never forgave himself for the others. The country made him a hero. He was given the Medal of Honor. The pigeon, Cher Ami, became famous across America and lived out its days as a celebrity before being preserved in a museum, where it remains. But Whittlesey could not put it down. He was asked, again and again, to stand up at dinners and reunions and relive the worst week of his life. He served as a pallbearer for the unknown soldier, and friends said he came back from it changed and very quiet. In November of 1921, 3 years after the Argonne, Charles Whittlesey boarded a steamship bound from New York to Havana. He was cheerful at dinner. He wrote a few calm letters and left them in his cabin. And sometime in the night, he walked out onto the deck and stepped over the rail into the dark sea. He was never found. He was 37 years old. The man who had refused to surrender to an army could not, in the end, escape the ravine he had carried home inside him. The Lost Battalion was never really lost. Whittlesey always knew exactly where his men were. What was lost was something quieter and harder to name, carried out of that forest by a few hundred survivors and by their reluctant commander, who saved them and could not save himself. They had no food, no water, and no way out. Their own guns fell on them. They were asked, reasonably, to give up. And a battalion of clerks and immigrants from New York said no and held a hole in the ground for 5 days against an army. That is the whole of it. That is everything.